day everyone, we are the group 2. For today's lesson, we will explain and discuss about the research methodology. So first, what is research methodology? Research methodology is the specific procedures or techniques used to identify, select, process, and analyze information about the topic. In a research paper, the methodology sections allows the readers to critically evaluate the study's overall validity and reliability. Meaning to say, methodology guides and explains why and how we collect or construct the data to address our research problems. Example of methodology is the way an experiment was carried out. Next one is developing the research methodology. In developing and writing the research methodology, it simply do not describe how data are to be collected or constructed. Instead, it strives to be explanatory and analytical. Moreover, it is helpful to ask the following question repeatedly as you develop your methodology. As you can see on our screen right now, there are the following questions. This means we use the related literature to underscore our decisions and choices in each section of our methodology and align our study framework to our variables and measures or concepts and indicators of our research instruments. Next, differentiating methodology and methods, the data gathering and data construction techniques. Methodology, the theory of how research should be undertaken, including the theoretical and philosophical assumptions upon which research is based and implication of these four methods or methods adopted by Sanders 2007, which means research methodology is a systematic way to solve a problem. It is a science of studying how research is to be carried out. Essentially, the procedures by which researchers go about their work and describing, explaining, and predicting phenomena are called research methodology. It is also defined as the study of methods by which knowledge is gained. It's aimed to give to work plan of research. While the method is the techniques and procedures used to obtain and analyze research data, including for examples, questionnaires, observations, interviews, and statistical and non-statistical techniques by Sanders 2007, which means it refers to the technique of drawing a sampling from your target population. The most preferred one is the probability sampling methods like simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, cluster-based random sampling, and so on. While the method of data collection includes the source and way of data collection. The source include whether you are using primary source or secondary source, and the way include whether you are using survey, interview, questionnaire technique, direct observation, or you are just saying collected.
Writing the section of methodology. Number 1. Research design. This answers the study paradigm, positivity, interpretative, or multi-paradigmatic. The goals, exploratory, descriptive, or exploratory. And the temporal dimension on one shot or longitudinal. This design that chosen by the researchers allows them to utilize the methods that's suitable for the study and to set up their study successfully in the future as well. Number 2, methods. This explains which quantitative or qualitative approaches are being used in their corresponding data gathering techniques. It can be used experiment, survey, and statistical tests to simply describe what did in method section. Number 3, units of analysis. This refers to the basic elements from data to study issue. The units of analysis, these studies about communication resources, received and individuals. This is for us to know who or what we are analyzing for our study. It can be an individual people, a group, or even an organization. Number 4, sampling. This is a process of collecting elements or units of analysis from the defined population, which is sampling is positivist studies and interpretivist studies. Positivist studies, the center goal is randomization, which means that population that every item unequal change of being includes in sample. Interpretivist study. It means we select information which is demonstrate expertise for provides rich insights, shared compelling stories, and pivotal characteristic as regards our topic. Sampling means selecting the group that you will actually collecting data from in your research. For example, if you are researching the opinions of students in your university, you could survey a sample, maybe 100 students. Number 5, variable and measures, concept and indicators. This based on the study framework. Variable and measurements refers to the conceptual and operations level in studies framework of positivist studies, whereas concepts and indicators employ theoretical or conceptual level of interpretive study. Gender, handedness, favorite color, and religion are example of variable measure on an innumal scale. The essential point of innumal scale is that they don't apply any ordering among the responses. Number 6, data gathering activities and procedures. This section discusses the specific protocols on how the data are collecting on constructed. For example, in budget and timeline. For budget, we can cite our finding source, responsibilities for transparency purposes. And for timeline, we must use Gantt chart to depict our different activities. Number 7, data analysis. This explains the procedure for processing, analyzing, and interpreting data, which quantitative methods and qualitative methods. Quantitative methods details the entries in completion instrument are reviewed from completeness, legibility, comprehensibility, consistency, uniformity, and in appreciate responses. Qualitative is a research strategy that focuses quantitative collection and analyzing of data. The data analysis plan is just how we are going to analyze it when you get the data from your participants.
Content Analysis by Professor Fernando Paragas and Professor Elena E. Pernia. Content analysis is a powerful method to capture the messages embedded in recorded communication materials. Through its theory-driven quantitative approach, it's helped us examine otherwise voluminous content using a manageable sample, which is derived using such protocols as the probability-based constructed week. 6.1 Basic Premises. The first is objective. Content analysis subscribe to the positivist paradigm, which means that the characteristics of messages in communication materials can be studied in a systematic and objective manner. Objective describes the target that you want to reach with your planned actions. By formulating this in advance, it can ultimately be evaluated whether the desired target is reached. And objective is to convey a message to listener and reader of what intended to persuade to people.
And one of my sample example is instructions and policies, procedures. The second one is theory driven. The conduct of content analysis is deductive in nature. A study framework constructed from a theory or a set of theories contains the nature and definition of the variables and measures in the study. Theory driven is how or why something works, ranging from what is to be guessed in a certain problems of what theory you have to formulate for evaluation or finding an answer for the validity of a researcher. Quantitative. Quantitative in its approach, content analysis determine the frequency or extent to which these manifest elements report or recur in a specific. Quantitative simply means something that can be measured. It's also explore human communication by collection of a data to be analyzed to get the numerical data. And my example here is we can count a number of cattle in a dairy farm or measure the gallons of miles produced by the said farm. Replicable. As the conduct of content analysis is informed by the principles of the classical scientific process, it can be replicated with expectation that the findings will be similar within a certain margin of error. Replicable by creating the same study to yield the same results or duplicating the same study. And my example here is a researcher study about the effect of alcohol drink to an adult person, but it can be replicated to young ones to see if it's the same result. Generalizable. Content analysis abides by probability principles and procedures. Accordingly, findings from a content analysis conducted on a sample of messages are generalizable to the universe of messages from which the sample was drawn. Generalizable is about to conduct a content analysis to the whole population on a group, not only finding answer to a particular problem, but finding solution as a whole. 6.2 Basic components of content analysis. First is content. In content analysis refers to messages as conceptualized in the positivist paradigm. This content is embedded in communication materials in print, audio, audiovisual, and electronic formats. It also pertains to communication material used in various communication levels like interpersonal, organizational mass, communication and platforms, and also folk media, electronic media, interactive media. And my explanation is finding patterns and correlations in the way concepts are delivered, understanding a person's or a group's or an institution's objectives. Constructed week. In the constructed week sampling scheme, the researcher randomly chooses one Monday, one Tuesday, one Wednesday, one Thursday, one Friday, one Saturday, and one Sunday to comprise 1 week. This collection of randomly drawn days becomes our constructed week. Researchers shown that findings from 2 constructed weeks have better generalizability than data from 2 chronological or calendar weeks, meaning from Monday to Sunday. Constructed week is simply random sample or consecutive day sampling are less efficient than constructed week sampling. However, whereas a single manufactured week allows for credible content estimations in a population of months of study, content analysis acquired during the same period requires at least 2 constructed weeks and as many as 5 constructed weeks, depending on the type of variables being examined. Intercoder reliability. This refers to the consistency with which different coders or content analysts would independently but similarly code the same item. This is the degree to which to separate researchers agree on how to code the same content is known as intercoder reliability. It's frequently utilized in content analysis when one of the research goals is to achieve uniformity and validity in the analysis. When different researchers are coding a set of data, intercoder identity assures that they reach the same findings. 6.3 Procedures for doing content analysis. Start with the basic conceptualization process. A content analysis begins with the basic steps of introducing the study and its significance, the statement of the problem and objectives, the review of related literature, and the construction of the study framework. This is when you make content analysis step by step and of course be realistic, and the significance of the content analysis. Identify the units of analysis. The units of analysis are where you get your data based on your research question. In content analysis, the unit of analysis can be the whole material or a specific item in that material. Identify variables and measures. Variables are attributes of your units of content analysis, whereas measures are the parameters of these attributes. Based in my understanding, if how we measure variables are called scale of measurements, and it affects the type of analytical techniques that can be used on the data and conclusions that can be drawn from it. Develop, pretest, and revise the instrument. The content analysis form and the code guide contain the variables and measures of the study. The content analysis form is where we enter the data, whereas the code guide tells us how to do this. Select a representative sample. The primary method for sampling in content analysis is constructed week, which involves randomly drawing dates for each day of the week to develop a non-chronological or non-calendar week. Determine the database. Once you have defined your units of analysis, the next step is to create the database from which you will get your units of analysis. Test for encoder reliability. To code a material the same way as others would code it. That is the maximum behind intercoder reliability. It ensures the objective reading and coding of the message at hand. Implement your project. When all members have accomplished their content analysis forms, then it is time to encode this into a database.
Textual analysis. Textual analysis is a methodology in research used in interpreting text to find possible meaning of this text uh, based on what interpretation the researcher or the textual analyst uses. It involves understanding language, symbols, and pictures present in text. Basic premises. This basic premises is the basic statement upon whose truth and argument is based. For example, um, your research will base the information you gather. You have you have basis in all your statement to justify your research uh, and to conclude. Uh, Text ends as artifacts of cultures. the text and textual analysis is called text. It is assumed to be the reflections of the culture or the context in which is embedded. Give the information about the culture of its creator and users. For example, in artwork, that shows the living of Filipinos. So, in that picture tells about the culture of Filipinos. You can get the idea about the culture of one country in just a piece of artwork. Next is culture as both heterogeneous and homogeneous units. Um, Culture, therefore, is seen not just a homogeneous entity but also a heterogeneous or polytheistic unit composed of varying sensibilities with uh, overlapping and sometimes contradicting tendencies. Uh, Heterogeneous refers the differences in cultural identity related to ethnicity, language, traditions, and religions, and many other cultural aspects. Uh, Homogeneous is one in which the shared meanings are similar and little variation in beliefs exist. For example, Philippines in Japan, heterogeneous will identify the differences of the both country about the tradition and language, but heterogeneous tells that the people in two different countries both Asian. Next is sense making as essential in textual analysis. This is the act of arriving the meaning at literally means making sense of what presented to the sense, like evaluating, feeling, and getting to know. The next one is text as evidence of culture. Text are evidence of culture. I mean, Text are evidence of the existing cultures. For example, in social media or any platform, photos of food is in social media are one of the evidence of the culture cuisine. So in just one picture, you can identify the uh, uh, culture of one country, food culture. So next one is context, context, context. A context is a place of or the universe where something is logged in. The text, it has content, and the reader of the text has also a context. A context is the setting of a word or event. It helps the reader to understand or to define the unknown words. The next one is subjectivity as qualitative research. The focus of subjectivity is on the position of the knower or the analyst, researcher, sense maker, or interpreter as an important participant in knowledge production. This means this means that the subjectivity guides everything from the choice of your topic that one studies and interpreting data. And methodology, the researcher is encouraged to reflect on the values of and objectives. Procedure for textual analysis. How do we undertake analysis? Here are the basic steps of how to undertake the content analysis. The first one is start with focus as a warm up for conceptualization. Start from something you may be familiar to the topic or to something you spend a lot of time. The next one is uh, formulate a tentative research question. It can be like choosing a topic, and this is still part of conceptualization. Next is a review related literature and study theories that may guide your study. This part is goes to hand in hand with formulating question and depending the articulation on why a researcher's interest in the topic. Next is select text form as artifact. Selecting a text by collecting several kinds of text, like making a makeup tutorial in YouTube or in other platforms. To select is to decide which one of what kind of platform you are going to choose. The next one is select a unit of analysis. Select what particular aspect of the artifact should be chosen to be interpreted. Identify concept and indicators. Next is identify concept and indicators. This identification of the study's concept and indicators for qualitative research is the equivalent of the identification of variables and measures in research. Next one is analyze the text. Analyze the text to clarify all the information as you read the text. This is letting the text to speak to you regardless of your knowledge of it. Next one is describe the text. Describe the text. This is like a think out loud exercise to familiarize the researcher with the text. If one can describe something in the research, there is something really does exist. The next one is interpret the text. This part will ask the following questions like who is the speaker or the writer or a performer? What is her or his position? And who is the intended audience? And then the next question is what is the existence which prompted to this right? For example, if you are the speaker or in agriculture, you should specify your audience, which is farmers, and write a related topic connected about farming. Likewise, there are the interpretation of textual features which ask the following: what is the issue is being addressed? What is the position does the writers take? And what is the author major claim or thesis? This is this claim qualified? What evidence or reasons does the author supply to support the claim? And how good are their reasons or evidence? And do you trust or distrust the claim of evidence? And the last part of this the last part of this textual analysis is review interpretation. So this last step is what you see in final interpretation to have gone through a lot of review.
What is survey? Survey defined as the collection of information from the sample individuals through their responses to a questionnaire. The form of a survey may be customized to a given address, studies of problem, and objectives. Survey as a quantitative research method, it inquire about the incidence of sampled respondents and survey count the number of times these incidences occur. There are two types of survey to efficiently use to gather a huge amount of information or data across a defined sample, depending on the sample design. First is the cross-sectional survey. The researcher collects data at one point in time. For example, students at middle school complete surveys about testing. They are recording data about their present views. This design measures its current attitudes and practices. It also provides information in a short amount of time. Second is the longitudinal survey. This survey conducted across in time to observe and change in respondent behavior and thought processes. This time can be days, months, years, or even decades. For instance, A researcher planning to analyze the change in buying habits of teenagers over 500 years will conduct longitudinal survey. Four main benefits of survey research. First is the cost. Surveys are relatively inexpensive. Online surveys and mobile surveys in particular have a very small cost per respondent. Even if incentives are given to respondents, the cost per response is often far less than the cost of conducting a paper survey or phone survey, and the number of potential responses can be in the thousands. Second is extensive. Surveys are useful in describing the characteristic of a large population, in which ensures a more accurate sample to gather target results, in which to draw conclusions and make important decisions. Third is the flexible. Survey can be administered in many modes, including online surveys, email, social media, paper, mobile, telephone, and face-to-face interview survey. Fourth is the dependable. The anonymity of survey allows respondents to answer with more candid and valid answer. To get the most accurate data, you need respondent to be as open and honest as possible with their answer. Survey conducted anonymously provide an avenue for more honest and unambiguous responses than other types of research methodologies, especially if it is clearly stated that survey answer will remain completely confidential. First, the application. The survey gathers information from individuals through their responses to a standard questionnaire. Second is the focus. Surveys are typically designed to state the problems and objectives. However, not all surveys are precisely designed to target a defined list of research problems and objectives. It covers an assortment of questions that inquire on a variety of topics that would potentially interest different researchers. Third is the goal. Surveys are typically employed when the research goal is descriptive or evaluative. The descriptive research uncovers what is going on or what exists, for example, population census or product marketing survey, while the evaluate research assess whether an intervention has achieved its objectives and what combination of factors or variables is most effective in achieving desired outcomes. An explanation that changes in the independent variable are consequently followed by changes in the dependent variable, while holding other variables on constant, which is the goal of explanatory research. And the last part is the procedures for doing survey. First is the conceptualize your survey project. Every research project starts with reading a broad range of materials and conceptualize in a broad range of references to enable your choice of survey research. Once you finalize your chosen topic, read some references related to your topic that help you in expressing the survey question of your research, the problem, and the objectives that defining on what you intended to cover on your research topic. Second is the choose your survey form and tool. Consider the strengths and weaknesses of various survey forms in particular survey. For example, the Google Form survey software and questionnaire tool that users will easily put together via drag and drop interface. This can be entirely customized, and this tool provides you with real-time response, info, and charts. Third is the develop your survey questionnaire. Survey questionnaire facilitate between the researcher and the respondents. You have to set your questionnaire to ask your respondents to address your study's problem and objectives, and that questionnaire you set answered. However, survey questionnaire serves two important functions, which is the measuring device and the communication device. Measuring device converts the measures of the concept that you want to study into question and response, while communication device is the measure of the concepts that you want to study through language and form from your respondents must clearly understand you. Therefore, the questionnaire should be carefully created so that the respondent can be properly understand the content, which helps them to accomplish the survey's form. Fourth is the design your sampling scheme. Survey must satisfy the requirement for external validity, which means that the survey results generated from the representative sample may be used to make inferences about the target population. Fifth is the implement your survey. There are two types of implementing your survey. The first one is the face-to-face survey. Survey interviews play a critical role in the interviewer administrative survey. To be successful for you to conduct a data, you need to prepare the following materials that contain survey kit, survey questionnaire, interviewer greeting, and departure script, informed consent form, the standard tool for recording responses, and other collaterals to conduct the survey. The second one is the online survey. It is a well-articulated and format questionnaire when implementing self-administered survey. This means that a research participant is given a set of questions in writing to which he or she is asked to respond. Self-administered questionnaires can be delivered in a hard copy format, typically via mail or increasingly more commonly online. And the last part is the encode, process, analyze, and interpret results. The data you gathered from surveys must be encoded, processed, analyzed, and interpreted.
Ethnography is the art and science of describing a group or culture. It is a valuable research method because of its strength, reducing ethnocentrism and helping to understand complex societies and human behavior. Also, ethnographic research can produce rich data and interpretation. Ethnography can help investigate very complicated or critical design challenges. When do we use ethnographic research or ethnographic approach? Ethnographic approach may be suitable for the early stages of the project or early stages of the research that deals with a particularly complicated or critical challenges. This is because ethnographic methods allow a particularly deep understanding of a design problems, domain, audiences, processes, goals, and context of use. These ethnographic methods can also be very useful in discovering and exploring previously unknown issues. The three basic premises in ethnography. First is the ethnography as interpretivist research. It means to describe the context, processes, and meanings of a community in their everyday settings. While it maybe sounds easy, but actually not. It requires so much planning and actual work because ethnography has to be a strategic activity. Ethnography aims to understand and describe a social or cultural group or situation from the insider's perspective. The second premise is about the value of ethnography. The value is about attempting to understand the cultural context of people's behavior and the symbolic meaning and significance of that behavior within that context. The ethnography approach is also most useful when dealing with something new, different, or unknown. The third and last ethnographic premises is about the ethnography and reflexivity. Reflexivity is an absolute necessary requirement for the students who want to utilize ethnography in communication and mass media research. So what does it mean, the reflexivity? Reflexivity generally refers to the examination of one's own beliefs, judgments, and practices during the research process and how this may have influenced the research. The 5 basic concepts in ethnography. The first is about the in-depth focus on culture. Ethnographers needs to know about both the cultural behavior and cultural knowledge to describe a culture or subcultures properly and sufficient. For example, ethnography can be a paid job or employed to study the culture of fan groups who idolize certain media icons. It can also be used to characterize the nature and practices of media, group, or institutions. The second concept is about the use of a holistic perspective and emphasis on context. Ethnography assumes a holistic outlook in research to gain a comprehensive and complete picture of a social group. This description might include the group's history, religion, politics, economy, and environment. Also, they enable the researchers to tell more interesting stories, promote awareness and appreciation of other groups and people's culture. The third concept of ethnography is about the awareness of symbols and rituals. Ethnographers look for symbols that help them to understand or study and describe a culture. Symbols are condensed expressions of meaning that evoke powerful feelings and thoughts. For example, in communication and media, students can study the symbols in the internet. The symbols that they are referred to can be about the emojis that mostly of the youths use to express their feelings and thoughts or exchange opinions or idea to other people. The fourth concept is about the unawareness of both emic and ethic perspective. The emic perspective, or the insider's view, is at the heart of most ethnographic research. It helps the researchers to understand why members of the social group do what they do. An ethic perspective naman is about an external social scientific perspective on reality. Most ethnographers start collecting data from the emic perspective, and they then try to make sense of what they have collected in terms of both the locals' views and their own scientific analysis. The last concept is about the adoption of a non-judgmental orientation. It means a non-judgmental orientation requires the ethnographer to suspend personal valuation of any person, group, or cultural practices. What does it mean? It means that being biased can color the way we approach our subjects, the question we ask, and the way we interpret our findings. In other words, it can greatly and influence our research. Procedures for doing ethnography. To actually conduct an ethnographic study or research, according to Paul 10, 2004, you must propose 3 phases or tasks to actually conduct it. First, the researchers has to gain permission from academic bodies such as the advisor and the school, and also from the site of the proposed ethnographic research. It means that you need an approval or approved research proposal and consent from the community and the people that you will study. The second is about the researchers has to ensure that once on the field, various data are sufficiently gathered and recorded. The third and last that you need to do is that the researchers has to guarantee that the findings are carefully analyzed and written in a manner that is acceptable academically as well to the community or culture that the researchers has studied. It means that first, the study must academically have a convincing contribution to the social scientific knowledge. And second, presenting a picture of the field that does not damage the social image of described person and or collected too much. Ethnographers have traditionally used various classical ethnographic techniques such as carrying out fieldwork and living in the communities of their hosts, observing activities of interest. The next is about the recording field notes and observations. Next is about the participating in activities during observations, also called participant observation. carrying out various forms of ethnographic research, ethnographic interviewing. It is important to note or remember that ethnographic researchers must be open to the use of all data collection techniques for understanding the human condition and not be limited by the boundaries of labels such as qualitative versus quantitative. Types of ethnography. While there are no fixed and universal typologies regarding ethnography, there are two general types can be identified or classified. First is about the classical ethnography or known as traditional ethnography. It is originated from and is usually used in the fields of anthropology and sociology. Classical ethnography relates to the accounts of social life studied within the particular location or settings upon which the ethnography is focused. For example, a classic example of the research is about anthropologists traveling to an island, living within the society on the said islands for years, and researching its people and culture through a process of sustained observations and participation. The other types is about the emerging types of ethnography. First is about the autoethnography. It means a combination of the terms autobiography and ethnobiography. Ethnography. It is about the researchers describes or analyze personal experiences to better understand a cultural event. For example of this is about the autoethnographies written as journals, short stories, poems, personal essays, and other forms. So what is the difference between autobiography and autoethnography? Autobiography is when people tell their own life experiences. They may only tell the events, but they may also include their own interpretations. Autoethnography means to analyze one's personal experiences in the specific context of the surrounding culture. Examples of other emerging types are virtual, digital, and visual ethnography. So, according to Paul Ten, he described the virtual ethnography as the ethnographic study of online activities in news groups and chat rooms and etc. Also, according to Christine Hein 2000, she stated that conducting an ethnographic inquiry through the use of CMC. So what is CMC? CMC is computer mediated communication. Opens up the possibility of gaining a reflexive understanding of what it is to be a part of the internet. For example, you want to do a research about the fan culture in the seniors online community. Then you can use online ethnography or virtual ethnography to study seniors' experiences of fan on the internet and within online communities. The next emerging types is about the digital ethnography. It is a research into the digital, material, and sensory environment. As according to Pink et al. 2016, she said that it takes a starting point the idea that digital media and technologies are part of the everyday and more spectacular worlds that people inhabit. For example, in COVID-19 now, pandemic, we want to do a research, but because of pandemic, we have a limited face-to-face interaction. So that's why we use the digital ethnography as a means to conduct our research. The last is about the visual ethnography. It is a ethnographic research into visual technologies, images, metaphors, and ways of seeing. For example, visual ethnography example is about the photography, video, and web-based media.
The experiment is widely considered as the best method, the gold standard, for analyzing causality or the cause and effect relationship between variables.
Their resource requirements are often higher than those for most other research methods. Basic concept. Definition. Experiment can be broadly defined as the research method that studies the effect of an independent variable on the dependent variable. In the dependent variable is called the cause, while the dependent variable is the outcome or the effect in this case. Example. Experimental research is laboratory experiment which may differ in nature depending on the subject of research. Manipulation in experiment. Manipulation is a term used by researchers to describe how subjects are exposed to stimulus, treatment, or intervention in an experiment. It can mean two things. First, the researchers deliberately exposes the participants to deeper stimulus, treatment, intervention. Second, they choose how the exposure is varied. Example, some might be exposed to message in favor of capital punishment and others to message that are against it. In other words, when we say manipulate or control, we simplify mean that the researcher consciously decide on when and how the stimulus, treatment, or intervention is to be introduced to the experiment participants. The classic experiment. The basic components. There are different types of experiment. By classic, we mean the experiment as originally designed or what is referred to the true experiment. The classical experiment has 6 components as follows. A. Treatment. The independent or experimental variable. This is the variable that the researchers manipulate or modified and as such is cause variable in the causal relationship. B. Dependent variable. The trait or characteristic that is expected to change as a result of individual exposure to the treatment or independent variable. For example, in a study looking at how tutoring impact test score, the dependent variable would be participants' test score since this is what is being measured. C. The measurement of the dependent variable being the treatment is introduced in the experiment. In here, are randomly selected and assigned the two groups, control and experimental, and only the experimental group is treated. After close observation, both groups are post-tested and a conclusion is drawn that difference between these groups. D. Post-test. The measurement of the dependent variable after treatment has been introduced in experiment. Here, subjects are randomly assigned to the two groups. Both are presented, but only the experiment group is treated. After close observation, both groups are post-tested to measure the degree of change in each group. E. Experimental group. The group that received the treatment. Example, experimental group could receive a new medication, a different form of concealing of some vitamin supplement. F. Control group, the group that doesn't not receive the treatment. Example of control group can be seen in an experiment in which the researchers test whether or not a new fertilizer has effect on the plant growth. Other requirements. Random assignment of participants. In experiment, participants are assigned to a group, experimental or control, by chance of flipping a coin or generating a set of random numbers. The assignment of group is not based on the preference of the researcher or the participant. It is simply a matter of probability. Example of random assignment. After randomly selecting a pool of participants, each person is randomly assigned to either the group control group or the experimental group. The participants in the control group consume a place drink prior to exam that does not contain any caffeine. Equivalence of the experimental and control group. True experiments require experimental and control groups to be equivalent. In a laboratory setting, the researcher has some control on how to assign participants. But in a field setting, it is impossible to have two areas, experiment sites that are 100% similar. The equivalence of group is easier to establish in the laboratory and field experiments. Condition of causality. Equivalence of group in the pretest, the experiment and control group should have similar socio-demographic profile. The experiment group should be composed of young, well-educated, and city-based participants. Prior to the administration of the stimulus treatment in prevention to the experimental group, all groups should have the same profile. Non-equivalence of group in the post-test. Different groups of participants in a study should have different attitude and behavior profiles after the stimulus and treatment. Absence of treatment effect in the control group. The term absence of treatment effects means that the member of the control group shown no change in their profile for the dependent variable. Presence of treatment effect in the experimental group. The experimental group participants are the ones who receive the stimulus treatment intervention, as well as the dependent variable, which determines whether or not they are considered to be part of experimental group. Experimental design. There are three main types of experiments that can be conducted: through experiment, pre-experiment, and quasi-experiments. The experiments differ from each other in terms of the way they are designed and consequently the extent to which they can establish causality. Through experiment conforms to the classic experiment discussed above. Example of true experiment design are pre-test, post-test, control group, post-test only, and control group. Pre-experiment. A pre-experiment is a design in which there is no real control group and the pre-test is optional. Pre-test means are often easier to implement than true experiment design. However, they provide little evidence of causality because they involve two or more groups. Example, this would be teacher using a different instructor method in their class. CASA experiment. A CASA experiment is similar to a true experiment but uses a control group, and the researcher implements protocols to ensure and confirm equivalence of the experimental and control group. Example of CASA experiment research design include the time series non-equivalent control group design and the control balance design. Procedures for doing experiment. Conceptualizing the experiment. Determine if the experiment is appropriate for the study that you want to do. If you are interested in determining the impact of an intervention, independent variable, on people's perception, knowledge, attitude, and behavior, then the experiment is your first choice. Then you have to assess the resource requirement, be realistic in your assessment, but don't be afraid to dream either. Complete the basic conceptualizing process. Experiments begin with the basic step of articulating the focus of the study and its significance, the statement of problem and objectives, the review of relatability literature, and the construction of the study framework. Planning your experiment. Choose the type of experiment. true or quasi-experiment, the specific type of study. Quasi-experiment is the most unusual of the three types of experiment. It has less stringent requirements than a true experiment but is more robust. It is most commonly used in communication and media research, as well as in the other fields such as psychology and sociology. Choose your experiment setting, laboratory or field versus field. The comparative advantage and disadvantage of the two settings to guide you in your decision. State the hypothesis be tested. Four basic hypotheses tested in experimental studies as follows. 1. There is no significant difference in pre-test scores of control and experimental groups. Equivalence of group in the pre-test. Number 2, there is a significant difference in a post-test score of the control and experimental group. Non-equivalence of group in post-test. Number 3, there is no significance between the pre-test and post-test score of the control group. Absence of treatment effect in the control group. Number 4, there is a significant difference between pre-test and post-test scores of the experimental group. Presence of treatment effect in the experimental group. Decide how you will design the study intervention or treatment. Decide how you will manipulate your independent variable. This is entails such as decision as what material you will produce, prepare, and what message this material will be contained. Identify who your experiment participant will be. Identifying the socio-demographic characteristic of your experiment participants, such as their age, socio-economic status, vocational attainment, and then list the other participant characteristics pertaining to your study. Decide how to introduce the treatment intervention. In a pre-test, post-test study, you can introduce the stimulus treatment intervention after the pre-test and control group. If ever there is one will not be exposed to it. If there are multiple stimulus, you should determine the time lag between them. Decides how the data will be collected and design the appropriate research instrument. Most experiments make use of the survey method for the pre-test and post-test data gathering. In some experiments, observation is also used to gather data, whichever method you decide to use. Remember that you should use the same instrument for both the pre-test and the post-test.
Reception analysis concentrates on the audience themselves and how they come to a particular understanding of a view of text. Reception analysis is a mixed paradigm research method. According to Pernia, reception analysis can be approached to both quantitatively and qualitatively. It is informed by positivism in studying media effects and interpretivism in studying audience interpretation, and also in audience uses of media text. It also situates the investigation of audience in its cultural, social, as well as psychological individual dimensions. These are the basic concepts of receptional analysis. First is text. The text is anything what can be read, such as articles, newspapers, social media posts, and etc. Text is constantly interpreted, reinterpreted, used, and repurposed by the audience. Next is audience. Audience is an active agent in the communication process. Audience interpret text differently and consequently. They also construct their own meaning from the media text. Reception links to audiences. It refers to the use and interpretation of text by the audiences. According to Stuart Hall, reception involves two processes, which is encoding and decoding. Encoding, which is the active construction of a message by individual before it is shared with others. Decoding, Decoding is the recipient's processing of the message that is shared with them. There are also three ways of audience reading. Stuart Hall identified three types of audience reading or decoding of the text. These are dominant or preferred, negotiated, and oppositional. First is dominant or preferred, where the audience decodes the message as the producer wants them to do and broadly agree with it. The best example of this is watching a political speech and agreeing with it. Next is negotiated, where the audience accepts, rejects, or refines elements of the text in light of previously held views. For example, neither agreeing or disagreeing with the political speech or being disinterested. Lastly is oppositional. Oppositional is where the dominant meaning is recognized but rejected for cultural, political, and ideological reasons. For example, total rejection of the political speech and active opposition. Mediated construction of reality. It is through our interactions with others that our realities are shaped and reshaped. Kuldry and Hepp 2017. Media effects are usually studied as negotiated as opposed to a direct effect of a stimuli. These are the procedures for doing reception analysis. Conceptualize the research. Conceptualization is the process in which the researchers identify key concepts used in the research. Also provide a unified explanation of those concepts that both the researcher and the audience is on the same page. Design the research. Once you have decided on the concepts that you want to explore, examine the related literature on the subjects, identify the theoretical approach to reception, and design the research. Qualitative data collection method. In-depth interviews offer the opportunity to capture the rich, described data about how people think and behave, and unfolding complex processes. In-depth interviews. According to Burgess, in the context of reception analysis, in-depth interviews are useful because these techniques explores individuals' perspectives, perceptions, and opinions regarding different forms of text, specifically that they consume. Methods that commonly employed. Select informants, set the interviewer time and date, prepare the interview guide and interview materials, conduct pilot interview, conduct the interview, and end the interview. Focus group discussion. Focus group discussions are the most commonly used research method in analyzing audience reception. As compared to interviews, FGDs examine how an individual's view, related or not, or interact as in social interactions with that one of another in a group discussions. Prepare for the FGD. A team is typically formed in preparation for a focus group discussion, depending on the scope of the research and the size of the focus groups. An FGD team may also recruit an additional co-facilitator and another assistant. Select FGD participants. In selecting FGD participants, remember to limit the group size between 6 to 12 participants because this is the optimal size for a facilitator to be able to efficiently manage the group discussion. Set the FGD time and date. The FGD team must pick a venue that is accessible to the participants and it must be relatively quiet and comfortable, and the environment stimulates open communication and dynamic interactions. Prepare the FGD guide and FGD materials. Conduct the FGD. Before the actual discussion, a member of the FGD team must see to it that attendance is checked. The participants may fill out an attendance sheet or a more detailed individual information sheet before being given name tags where their nicknames are indicated. And the FGD. Before ending the focus group discussions, the facilitator may ask if the participants have any questions or clarifications on the discussion, matters raised during the discussion, or the entire process of FGD or research. FGD team must thank the participants for sparing their time for the research available. Give the token of appreciation. Participant observation. Participant observation is a qualitative research method in which the researcher studies a group not only by observing the group but also by participating in the activities of the group. Steps in conducting POs. Prepare for the field. It is important to seek permission and help to be able to conduct the PO, especially as POs ought to be conducted in the informant's natural setting. Sample or choose the participants. Informants or participants are mainly chosen through purposive sampling or the selection of participants based on their characteristics and who may yield the most comprehensive understanding of the reception study. Conduct the PO. When recording the observations, take note of the location, the duration, and the frequency of the observation. Add demographic information about the participants as well as their behaviors and practices, particularly in relation to their media consumptions and engagement with the media content. Quantitative research techniques. Quantitative reception analysis look into the third form of reception analysis studies, the effect of text, which is drawn from media affects research. Surveys. Surveys are used in reception research to get insights regarding the associations between media and content use on the one hand and audience behavior on the other. Socio-demographic characteristics such as age, gender, socioeconomic status, and ethnicity are usually included in survey research. Media exposure such as average hours of consuming TV, radio, newspaper, film, outdoor media, or social media content are examined to measure viewership or readership of media. Media usefulness can also be included in reception surveys. Knowledge, attitude, and behaviors, which are asked typically in surveys, are used in reception analysis to establish the link between text and audience processing of information. Experiments. In reception analysis, experiments are used to test the effect of text on audiences.
Case study. Based on the articles, case studies provide practical and context-based knowledge. They help researchers to explain the development of individuals, organizations, and communities, and eventually the societies. Case study is, according to Flyberge, notes that case study research has the power to provide an in-depth understanding of how processes work and why effects happen after a successful or unsuccessful exposure to a certain text event or even a social phenomenon. Case study versus other methods. Differentiating process, documentation, the case study versus an ethnography. The interpretivism nature of case study research allows researchers to look into a communication phenomenon from an informed standpoint. Establishing causality case study versus other positivist methods. It explained the focus on causality in case study research is defined by its analytical approach. Process tracing by finding the causes and effects. Case is, according from Rajin and Becker, they forwarded the notion that a case may be theoretical or empirical or methodological construct or object or a process. They stated that cases are identifiable elements of a system being studied. One is, what is a case study? Case study approaches the appropriate method because the researchers could observe and record changes in a case after an intervention was introduced to it. Is the characteristic of a case study. First one is the rigidly planned. Not rigidly planned. The researcher, armed with knowledge about the subject matter, must have open mind in documenting what is out there in the field. There should be a tolerance to any unforeseen scenario, and that the events that are lived by the case or cases would lead to the right findings. Next one is detailed. The aim of a case study is to look for patterns of regularities. The method, the method allows the researcher to explain the process and understand why certain conditions occurred. Next is contextual. This communication research method acknowledges the fact that a phenomenon can be studied in its entirety without the necessary requirement of a replication. Next one is interactive. Case studies are constructed works. The findings are drawn from the scholarly bias of the researchers. There must be a constant comparison and contrast between the communication situation being described and the reflections of the researcher. Next is the last one is the propositions based. A proposition is an assertion that must be proven or disproven by the case. The researcher must be aware that the unit of analysis could provide the data for the assertion and eventually the proposition to be confirmed or disconfirmed. The next one is the procedures of doing the case studies. It starts with the research conceptualization. It determines and defines the research questions. The researcher must be able to carefully define the research question. As previously mentioned, case study research begins with a how or a why question. Rowley mentioned that the researcher must also ask the following questions before deciding to venture in the case research. First one is, what is the existing knowledge about the phenomenon? Second is to understand the field research procedure. Third is, what would be the various sources of information that I need, and do I have access such source? And last one is, do I understand my own case study questions? Next one is interview. The use of interview is providing a in-depth information about the case by identifying key participants. The researcher is led to both knowledge and opinions that may provide insights regarding the research question. Next one is participant observation. Case study researchers construct the phenomenon along with the insights from the informants and participants. One way to provide information objectively is through a skilled process of observation. Second, the next one is the document analysis. The case study researcher is also required to review published sources as evidence that support the initial assumptions in the case. Reviewing existing documents or creating and administering new ones provide useful information about the nature of the case. When a case study researchers gathers information from documents, it is important to ask the following questions. first one is what sources are available that can be used to provide answers to my research questions. Next, what types of answers will be available if the documents is used. Next is how will inform be selected from all that is available. How will the documents be represented during data analysis? What ethical concerns are relevant with regard to document that will be analyzed? Is the survey. The survey. For case study projects, the value of a survey rests on its capacity to establish causes and effects. Surveys may provide correlated and associated factors that cause an effect through statistical modeling. First, code your data. When gathering the necessary information for a case study is complete, a coding guide must be put in place in order for the researcher to know if the right information has been collected. Analyze, interpret, and report your data. The next section focuses on these 3 steps: first, case study, and the other method.